I'm here on Maui, one of the most beautiful places in the world. But it wasn't always this way. It was formed by volcanic eruptions. Hot, molten lava became what you see today. Beautiful. But it came full circle when on August 8th, 2023, a devastating fire swept through the historic town of Lahaina. And what was once a town full of life was leveled to ashes. But the Bible gives us hope today, and we're about to talk about it because we're about to see that God can bring beauty from ashes. Jesus didn't come into a cushy world, did he? I used to wonder why Jesus didn't come into the world during the internet age. Why he could have live streamed his message around the world in seconds. He could have used a push notification to instantly spread the message. But instead, he came at a time when the quickest way to deliver a message was by fast donkey. He came during a time of political upheaval. The Jews were at odds with the pagan society of Rome, and Jesus' mother was refused lodging when he was born. And then hearing reports of this birth that the prophets foretold of, King Herod began searching for this baby, and he began with exterminating all the Jewish males under the age of 2. I'd say that's a pretty chaotic environment to have been born into. It was in the midst of crisis and fear that God decided to deliver the greatest message the world has ever heard, a message of hope and redemption. But that's God's MO, isn't it? The DNA of God is to bring something good out of chaos, light out of darkness, beauty from ashes. Even creation itself was born out of chaos. The Bible tells us that in the beginning, things were a mess. And Genesis chapter 1 and verse 2 says it this way: "The earth was formless and void, and darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters." There it is. Did you see it? Even in chaos, God's Spirit was hovering just above the waters. In the turbulent, torrential upheaval, the Spirit of God was just a centimeter or two above it, close, attending, watching, intimately familiar with everything that was going on. The Spirit of God was waiting, just waiting for the Father at just the right moment to change the tide, waiting, and just then, God would say, "Let there be light." And aha, and now things make sense. Now it comes into order. But before that, just chaos. You know, there's so much of God's ways that we will only understand in reverse. Beforehand, chaos. Afterwards, the light turns on. Let there be light. Before that, confusion. Yet still, the Spirit of God is moving and staying that close to everything. Chaos can take many forms in our lives. For some, it's silly, like chaos is just trying to get to church on time or find a parking spot at Costco or trying to get those hard-to-get concert tickets. For others, chaos might seem to pop up in relationships, financial setbacks, work problems. Chaos is when we see our dreams vanished. Chaos is when it feels like, regardless how hard we try, nothing goes right. Circumstances around us are all out of control. And the hardest part about chaos is that it often feels like there's no hope, no end in sight, no light at the end of the tunnel. However, I declare to you that the Spirit of God is that close. He is still moving, intimately familiar. Now, most of us won't recognize him moving, but if the truth be told, we hardly are ever able to see his hand and purposes in advance of the chaos. We only see it in reverse after it's all done. Remember this, faith is living in advance what you will only understand in reverse. Did you catch that? Let me repeat it. Faith is living in advance what you will only understand in reverse. But even in the middle of the chaos, his promises are still true. Isaiah 61:3 says it this way, God is able to preserve those who mourn in Zion, to give them beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, the garment of praise for the spirit of heaviness. Now, the raging fire that left the remains and the ashes that are behind me, the once historic town of Lahaina, Maui, a chaos that cost many lives, left thousands homeless and shuttered hundreds of businesses and left the world speechless. We too find ourselves at times in the same struggle. Oh, maybe not nearly as devastating, but equally confusing. Been there? Done that? We cry out for answers, but there's only crickets. How often the Bible knows what we're going through, and it leaves us clues as to how God works then and now. And as we become more familiar with the Word of God, we become more familiar with His voice. There's an interesting story in John 19 and verse 11. Pontius Pilate, who was governing at that time, was getting ready to crucify Jesus. And Pilate began to interrogate Jesus. But Jesus wouldn't answer him. And Pontius Pilate said to Jesus in a condescending way, "You don't answer me? Don't you know that I have the power to free you or crucify you?" And Jesus' response, he answered, "You wouldn't have any power over me if it were not given to you from above." To many, the government might seem completely unjust, circumstances unfair, events can be unexplainable. Yet Jesus was saying that his Father's plan would ultimately overrule any of man's mistakes, and the Father is still in control. His plans would still go on. And as we trust him implicitly, even though chaos seems to surround us, we will one day look back and see the why. He will bring beauty from ashes. But we can't just sit idly by and mope. No, we can't wallow in a pity party. We have a part to play. We don't always understand what God is doing or how the Spirit is moving in advance of the chaos. So my questions to God must turn from why to what? What do I do? See, we get stuck on the why, and we end up confused and forever doubting. However, the what gives us an assignment. What shall I do? What do I learn? What do I answer? What do I think? And in the midst of the chaos, in the midst of the ashes, God gives us purpose and hope afresh. Direction. In Lahaina behind me, there's evidence of chaos everywhere. Roads are still closed. Houses have been reduced to rubble. Dreams and memories have turned to ashes. However, in just a few short years after the rebuilding process, the chaos is going to be replaced with new beginnings. You see, often we look at the circumstances when God is looking beyond and through the circumstances. God's still on the throne. We may not be able to see his hand, but I know for sure that in the end, you can trust his heart. So I ask myself, how can I make something good out of this chaos? God, how? How can you make beauty from the ashes? When the fire first swept through Lahaina, This 150-year-old banyan tree planted in 1873 was feared lost. But they didn't give up on it. And now, new life is starting to form again. Beauty from ashes. The good news is that events or circumstances will not determine your destiny. Remember, God does. The chaos you're in right now cannot keep you from your eternal purpose. It didn't stop David, even though he faced Goliath and a jealous King Saul who hunted him down like an animal. It didn't stop the Apostle Paul, and it won't you. Sure, you and I have to make some adjustments, and some adjustments will be easier than others. We know that, but it's okay because God's still on the throne. And by the way, God has already taken into account every detail of your life, every bad break, every negative event, how you were raised, or what someone did to you. He's factored all of that into His plan for you. Nothing takes Him by surprise. And if you'll just stay in step with God, instead of allowing circumstances to hold you back, everything that you went through, everything that you've experienced could actually propel you forward. Instead of defeating you, it'll make you stronger. Keep submitting to God. His plans are greater. His plans don't fail. Oh, we can fail His plans, but His plans will never fail us. So stick with it. Stay with it. Those events that seem so chaotic and unfair, you start thinking through them. But you think through them until they start to work for you and not against you. You see, that's exactly what God is doing, turning everything for good. Romans 8:28 tells us that He knows how to take what is meant for your harm and use it for your good. You may not see how it could ever turn out for good, but you have the most powerful force in the universe on your side. God created us to rise above, to break through, and to be more than overcomers. You may think the circumstance will crush you into a pile of scrap metal, but instead, you're God's masterpiece. And the circumstances that you're in right now will not keep God's purposes from being fulfilled in your life. So remember, no matter what it looks like or how it feels, the Holy Spirit is nearer than you think. He's watching over you. Even though you feel like you're drowning, God's still on the throne. Nothing can keep you from God's purposes for your life except you. So if you'll press through, you'll see that God has a plan and a purpose for you. We don't know what the future holds, but we know who holds the future. God's working through you and through me. Look for what's good in this season. He's offering us beauty for ashes. His Spirit is hovering just above the chaos, and He's in the midst of the mess. And in every mess is a message. One of the last remembrances I have of my parents still together was me holding onto my mom when I was 5, crying and asking my dad to not hit her anymore. At that point, we didn't see our dad for a long time, until one day my mom said we were going to have to go and live with him. I was so afraid. She was getting remarried, and we were going to live with our dad, who was in the Army and was being deployed to Japan. It was a difficult time. 2 of my siblings left and begged me to leave as well, but I stayed. My father was a first sergeant in the Army, and to say he was strict would be an understatement. He had a strap made of leather bootlaces that he kept handy, and I became quite familiar with the sting of the leather and the sound of the strap. I remember nights crying myself to sleep, wishing I were back with my mom. But when I was 16, my mother sent word to me and to my dad, asking him to send me back because she had fallen ill. We were in Japan, she was in Hawaii. My father didn't believe that she was really that sick, so he refused to send me back. But it was 2 weeks later I received word that my mother had just passed away, and my life was crushed. For 2 years, I fought hate and then anger than blame. I was completely crushed. I didn't know what to do. I felt lost, beaten, and helpless. I was stuck, nowhere to turn. But that's when God got my attention. C.S. Lewis once said, God whispers in our pleasures, but he shouts in our pains. It's a megaphone, he said, to awaken a deaf world. It was then that I finally turned my life to Christ, gave my life to full-time ministry. And later people would ask me, hey, Wayne, if you could change your past, would you? At first I would say, absolutely. But then after thinking through it and seeing how God has used every experience for my good, I answered, no, I wouldn't change a thing. God knew he was calling me to a ministry that would require everything of me and that I would be dealing with others who maybe have struggled with the same family issues. So he birthed my ministry out of chaos. And only then could I see the why when God finally said to me, let there be light. I got it. So what's his message to you? You might be going through chaos in your own life. Why not give it to Jesus? Why not let him into your world? He's always hovering just above the chaos, ready to bring beauty from ashes. And he can handle whatever rubble or mess you find yourself in today. All you have to do is ask. For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not harm you. Plans to give you hope and a future. God's not done with you. In fact, he's just getting started.